Morning, everybody. How we doing? I had to run back to Illinois yesterday, drop a grandkid off at grandma's, the whole surgery thing. She's got the grandkids down there kind of helping her out. They're 16 and 15, so they can do dishes and mow lawns and help grandma. But happy Father's Day to all you fathers out there. We're going to have a little special episode dedicated to dads. We're going to discuss, of course, Horace Silvers' song for my father, which seemed like the perfect opportunity to discuss that. First, I want to give a little tribute to my father. My dad was born in Leerdam, Holland in 1943, I believe. And it was under German occupation. Canadian boys came across and helped liberate Holland. And it was part of that is why my dad's family decided to immigrate to Canada in the early 50s. My dad's older brothers came across first in the early 50s, and then my dad and his parents came across probably 54, 55. And being Dutch immigrants, they didn't speak the language. The older two brothers had come over and set up a farm in Ontario. I'd asked my dad about this numerous times before he passed a couple years ago, and he took a boat called the Grote Bear. It's a Dutch word for the big great bear, the Grote Bear. And it was a small ocean liner compared to the Queen Mary, which my mom took, but all the same is what they crossed the ocean with. And they landed in Halifax on the eastern shore of Canada over in Nova Scotia. And my dad told about how they took a train and they basically rode in an unheated boxcar through the Canadian winter across the Gas Peninsula of Quebec up to Montreal, and then I think they changed to a different train or possibly a bus at Montreal into Toronto. But he told them that just the boxcar being freezing cold, they'd never seen temperatures quite like that in Holland. They came across pretty much penniless and moved into southern Ontario, got into their dairy farming. They came from kind of a preordained predestination kind of belief system of Christianity. My dad kind of didn't get a very long high school or school education. I think he dropped out in grade 6. But they were farmers. They were hard workers. He had a bunch of brothers. They were helping on the family farm. And my dad never got much education past that. But he still managed to be a very brilliant guy in a lot of ways. He became one hell of a finished carpenter. He, in the late 60s, was a pipe organ apprentice. And he learned how to do pipe organs and how to refinish and refurbish old pipe organs that were very popular in churches in the 20th century. And he ends up going into business for himself probably about 1970 in the city of Guelph, Ontario. He had his own factory, which I remember well, the kind of plate glass windows with the little cubes that are like a textured glass window that you can't really see through but it lets light in. Old kind of warehouse district-y looking thing. But I remember that factory and the pipes laying around. And he managed to secure and do some fairly big pipe organ contracts. We were in St. John's, Newfoundland. We were in Quebec in a few places. Winnipeg, Detroit. I believe we were in D.C. for one or two organs. Carolinas, perhaps. We were in a lot of different places putting in pipe organs for 3-4 years there. I was born in 72. I spent the first 2 years of my life on a bus that we converted into kind of a living home that we could travel to these destinations, because you don't deliver a pipe organ and plug it in. You install it into the building itself, and it's a month-long installation. And it was at this young age where I first encountered the black church. In both Detroit and in Washington, D.C., they were black churches these organs went into. I remember sitting in nurseries with a bunch of young black kids, infants, toddlers, and telling my mom, the chocolate faces, I love the chocolate faces. And that was just my only reference point. Being from rural southern Ontario, my exposure to black was next to none. And in Canada, race isn't something that's in the headlines all the time. And I'm sure I saw some blacks in Toronto, but I remember being really taken aback by being in a church nursery with all black kids. But we were doing just fine, hanging out, having fun, and there was not any kind of animosity or fear. It was just cool. We come in chocolate flavor too. Vanilla, chocolate, caramel, all good. But the naivete of youth, it was just such a cute, innocent thing. I remember the black churches though, and the way they praised and worshipped was very different than white churches. And over this whole process, my father kind of came to a fervent belief in religion and Christianity, and ended up becoming a minister and a pastor. Founded some churches in Guelph, in Manitoba, North Dakota, Minnesota. Of course, I went the preacher's kid route, grew my hair out, joined a metal band, and went as far in the other direction as I could. It's tough being a preacher's kid. It really is, especially when your parents are evangelical. We had some tough years. We moved to Manitoba in the Mennonite area, and we're really outsiders there. But you get through it, and you learn from your trials and tribulations and all those moments that were difficult, where I felt like an outsider, where I felt persecuted, where I felt unloved, going to school and being bullied all the time. It's partly what created my desperation to seek truth and to seek out understanding and what really matters and what I should really align my doctrines and philosophies with. And it's what's given me empathy for other people who struggle. That's what makes me understand the underdog and the weakling and those who don't have. I can relate to it from the sense of a 12-year-old who got beat up a lot in school. And it was a tough couple of years, but I started lifting weights. I started playing football, playing hockey, and you kind of grow through it. And part of that was rebelling against my parents. But my dad was a hard-working guy. He did his churches on Sunday, and he worked as a carpenter 5 days a week, 6 days a week. I can't say he was super present because he was so busy feeding us. I have 3 brothers and my mom, and it was a pretty full-time job keeping food on the table for the 6 of us. And my mom never worked. She was always a kind of a home mother. I love them both dearly. My mom was great. And my dad, I miss you, Dad. I love you. You were a strong presence and taught me a lot about work ethic and integrity and just keeping your word. If you say you're going to do something, do it. If you say you're going to be somewhere, be there. If you say you're going to do the job, do the job. He was always very dependable and very hardworking, but he came from a hardworking family of Dutch immigrants. He was a first-generation immigrant. And nobody values or appreciates the opportunity that is Canada and America more than a first-generation immigrant. That second-generation immigrant starts to think that they earned it a little bit, but they still saw how hard Dad worked, and so they can somehow value and appreciate hard work and effort and still work hard. Third generation, a little bit more entitlement creeps in. By the time you get to that fourth generation here, you're so entitled that you don't no longer connect with your roots to the old countries, and that entitlement is what breeds nationalism. And entitlement and nationalism is some naive shit. If you're stuck on nationality, you're short-sighted. If what the label placed on you at birth is all it takes to define you, you don't have a very good understanding of yourself. And I've often given this metaphor, I'm going to give it again here. So many people who are very strong nationalists are like a can of tomatoes. They've become a Dole or a Del Monte, a brand name. And you've been branded that name, and that's what you identify as. And if I have a shelf of canned tomatoes, and there's one little section of cans saying, "We're not tomatoes, we're Del Montes," those are dumb tomatoes. Because when I check the label, it might say Del Monte, but the ingredient says tomato. And so I challenge people to peel the labels of birth off your can. Take that Del Monte off, take all those informations off, and only reapply the labels that you're sure of. Race, religion, nation, get rid of that garbage. What are you sure of? Human earthling. Cool. That's my label. Human Earthling. That's my tattoo. Human Earthling. That's my philosophy. Human Earthling. Do not call me a Campbell. Do not call me a Dole or a Del Monte. I'm a tomato. Don't ever try to give me something I'm not. I don't want to be defined by things that don't have truth and honesty in them. Human Earthling, that defines me. Part of a grand migration around this planet for 1,000,000 years? Yup. The short-sighted philosophies of our ancestor religions? Can't do it. They divide us. They don't unite us. And while they all come from a similar place philosophically, and we all share a human spirituality, a lot of the detail needs to melt away. And new human spirituality needs to be recognized as we are one people. We are one group. And divided, we fall every time. And I just see the divide in this country so strong right now, and I urge people, stop being Del Montes. Be a tomato. Know who you are. Human Earthling, that's pretty all-encompassing. And boy, if we thought that way, think of the power we'd have, think of the unity we'd have, and think of the change we could make. That being said, we're going to talk about Horace Silver. Fantastic song from my father. It's Blue Note number 4185, which puts it in about 1964. That's actually Horace Silver's father on the cover. His name is John Tavares Silver. And I don't know if any disco fans are in the house, but there was a group called the Silvers, and there was a group called Tavares. So for him to be John Tavares Silver, it just feels like he should be a disco impresario, but he was not. He was originally born in Cape Verde Islands, which belonged to Puerto Rico. He was born on the island of Mayo, M-A-I-O, Mayo, and he worked in America for a tire company. That's what Horace Silver's dad did, John Tavares Silver. He worked in the tire company, but he brought home enough bills to allow his son to become one of the great musicians. Originally from the Connecticut area, once he moved to America, I believe it was Norwalk. And if you're in Norwalk or any of those places in Western Connecticut, you're essentially a New Yorker. You know, and you're not a Manhattanite, but you're part of the tri-state, absolutely. And your sphere of influence is New York. And you got to get near Rhode Island before Boston becomes what you think of as your rooting base. New York, most of Connecticut is very New York centric. So anyway, Silver ends up in New York, and Silver, we're going to do an episode more on his career eventually here, but he was one of the original Jazz Messengers. He played with Lou Donaldson early on. Donaldson was supposed to show up for a recording session for a quartet session for Blue Note for Alfred Lyon, and lo and behold, Donaldson didn't make it. And so Horace Silver was given the session as a trio, and so he was recording for Blue Note early on, and with Blakey, they started doing Jazz Messenger stuff first on Columbia, and then some live stuff at Blue Note, and then of course he leaves the Messengers with Mobley and with Doug Watkins, is it, I think, and he starts his own career as a solo artist with a new quintet, and that quintet goes through some changes over the years, but he makes record after record after record at Blue Note of solid, groove-based, space-based. He's such a driving piano player, and he's got Count Basie's minimalism. You know, he's definitely playing what needs to be played. He's removing the flourishes that don't need to be there, and he'll give you color and flourish, but he wants to more lay down a pocket for his horn players to fill. And he's one of the great innovators of hard bop, and most of his records are intellectual hard bop. And he's one of the real movers and shakers of the late 50s in the entire jazz scene, but especially at Blue Note. And his membership in his group comes and goes over the years. Blue Mitchell, takes the chair after Mobley, one of my favorite players. Not after Mobley, sorry. I think Kenny Dorham was there for a while. But Mitchell ends up in the chair for a while. Joe Henderson plays with him for a while. This record, believe it or not, is actually made up from 3 different groups. And it feels very cohesive, but it's actually one of the tracks, track 3, is the old quintet with Blue Mitchell and Junior Cook, with Gene Taylor and Ray Brooks on the drums. Gene Taylor and Ray Brooks on the drums. The guys you don't hear too much about, honestly. But the number 6, Lonely Woman, is just the trio, just with Roy Brooks and Gene Taylor and Horace Silver. Then the other 4 tracks are his new group, and Carmel Jones is taking the lead now on the trumpet, and Joe Henderson's on the tenor, along with Teddy Smith and Roger Humphreys on the drums and the bass. So his rhythm sections aren't really super well known, aside from the Blakey connection. You don't hear the name Roger Humphreys, Roy Brooks, Teddy Smith, and Gene Taylor thrown around a lot. But you certainly know the Carmel Joneses, the Joe Hendersons, the Blue Mitchells, the Junior Cooks, the Hank Mobleys. He definitely plays with a lot of the giants. And guys eventually left his group and went on to big things as well. His mom was actually an Irish Negro, part Irish, part Negro. And his dad was, like I said, Puerto Rican from the Cape Verdean Islands. And he makes a record called Cape Verdean Blues as well. But his parents come from diversity, and obviously they worked hard to keep their kids through school. He was the 3rd child of his parents, and John, the first child, died at 6 years old, and their second child, Maria, died was a stillborn. And so Horace Silver was the 3rd child, and he lived a long, full life and plays into the 80s and 90s and becomes one of the greats in jazz. He also had a much older half-brother by the name of Eugene. He wasn't in his life a whole lot, from what I understand. But Horace Silver is such an icon. He's such a strong figure in the blues-based reformation of bebop into hard bop. And he is the most soulful, groove-based, pocket presence. Even Blakey's stuff is more at tempo and more blazing and kicking it and fiery. Silver's more, it's moving, but it's this constrained, well-shaped blues. You know what I'm saying? And there's times when they get going at tempo, but they're more going to be mid-tempo, a little above mid-tempo, and they're going to be always in a pocket, always tapping your foot. Horace Silver didn't compose songs that weren't funky as hell, you know. And so it's just a great record from stem to stern. The second track shows them at a bit more of a blistering tempo here. This is The Natives Are Restless Tonight, and this sounds almost like something you get with Clifford Brown. And then this third track here is the one that I think is just the trio. No, this is the one with this is the one with Blue Mitchell on it, and the whole record's fantastic. I can honestly say this is one of those jazz records I have on CD as well. And so this record spent a lot of time in my car, and I'm pretty familiar with all the tracks to a pretty high degree. Que Pasa, fantastic kind of Latin tinge stuff. The Kicker, Joe Henderson composition, and The Lonely Woman, like I said, is that trio piece that's just gorgeous at the end of this record. I just cleaned this record, Ken. Sounds great. Thank you. I have 2 versions of this record. This is an old copy, and this was gifted to me by someone. I can't remember what series this is from. Again, I don't really care. And it's nice having 2 copies of this record. I keep the old one more on the shelf. This one I play at gigs a lot. One of the other interesting things about Song for My Father, it's just gorgeous blues. It's just gorgeous blues, you know? And the more I dig deeper into jazz, you're as great a jazz player as you are at playing the blues. Because I feel you when you're coming from that place. You can express and emote and tell me the greatest stories in the comfortable freedom of the blues. So all this notion of free jazz being this, it's intellectual, it's beyond freedom. It's complicated. The blues is freedom. The blues is, I'm gonna tell you a story. Because it's a simple, unthought, unneeded process of playing the blues, so I can just narrate. And instinctually, I know where these patterns are going to go. Thus, my mind is free, my soul is free, my spirit is free to emote. And jazz is about the emoting of improvisation. When I'm improvising, I'm not improvising notes. I'm telling you my emotional situation in life. And that's an important context to grab. Emoting and improvising are interwoven fabric. And they do the same function. I improvise to emote, and I emote through improvising. They should never be separated. We should never think that these two things aren't linked at the very core. And one other interesting thing about this record, that's of course the great opening, the song from my father. And I don't want to play that too loud. Steely Dan of course on the Pretzel Logic record, I believe, yep, pretty much borrows verbatim that groove. And this is before the days of sampling, so essentially they just redid it. But Fagan, they know exactly, Ricky, don't lose that number. And it's the same pattern, pretty much completely. Of course, I love Steely Dan. They're one of the great prog rock bands that immaculate production, immaculate playing, high level, just great sounding rock and roll. And it's pretty blues based as well. Brecker and Fagan are fantastic. But Horace Silver, Song for My Father, it's pretty much a must-have for any next tier jazz fan. That first tier, those are the real surface jazz collectors. They got sketches, they got kinda, they have a few other tastes of the day, maybe some Brubeck, maybe a couple Verve records that's felt nice, light and breezy, some Gary McFarland. They might have dug a Coltrane record, but it was a little too out for them. So that's level one as a jazz collector. You're buying the basics, and you just don't even really know jazz. You're just like, oh, I think I should have this record in my collection, so I look knowledgeable, and that's fine. Second tier, you start digging a little deeper, Song for My Father should be near the top of the list. This separates level one collectors from level two collectors. You got some Song for My Father in your collection? Okay. You know something about jazz. See, if you tell me you got Kind of Blue in your collection, it doesn't tell me nothing about how much you know about jazz. You tell me you got Brubeck's Time Out in your collection, it don't tell me nothing about how much you know about jazz. You drop Hank Mobley or Horace Silver, I'm like, okay, we can talk. And then you've come up with some Charlie Shavers, that's instant credentials, you know what I'm saying? So the levels go deep, and the conversation is based off, where did you leave off? How far have you dug? Because if you ain't dug very deep, we can't talk very hard. But if you got some deeper levels, see what I'm saying? Suddenly our conversation can go a lot of places. So it's a great measuring stick. Horace Silver, Hank Mobley, Lee Morgan, those great hard bop Blue Note people, they have enough publicity because of the resurgence and love for Blue Note that almost any second tier collector will know those names. And if you talk to someone that they say they love jazz, they don't know Horace Silver, Hank Mobley or Lee Morgan or Art Blakey. They are someone who came to jazz on a whim and either needs to dig deeper and just hasn't got around to it, or they possibly never will. They probably made the mistake of buying Bitches Brew and never want to hear jazz again. Maybe someone said, oh, at the record store, you should take home this Ornette Coleman. And they said, oh, okay, the record store guy knows what he's talking about. Because the record store kid's like 16, and he read about how important Change of the Century is. So he sold it to some gal who's never going to listen to jazz again now. Great job, kid. Jazz is meant to be loved, appreciated, listened to, dug. And let's promote the positive, happy, uplifting stuff. So anyway, Dad, I love you, miss you. You made a huge impact on my life. And people tell me all the time how much preacher I got in me. Got some of that from you. Unfortunately, I got to admit, I got some of my preacher from my mom too. My mom was probably more the evangelistic, soul on fire, ball of spitfire. My mom was a volcano. Don't give her a microphone. Do not give my mother a microphone ever. She'll hug you on a subway. She don't even know you because Jesus told her to. So that's my mom. You can't. But I got some of that in me. I'll talk to people too on the subway. Just I come from a different place. But I got my parents in me all through and through. And then Horace Silvers song for his father. Great stuff. A great tribute to his dad. And people, all you dads out there, much love. Being a dad is a noble, valuable thing to be. It's one of the most important things you can be in life. Is to instruct that next crew of kids coming up how to be men. How to be men. How to be responsible. How to keep our promises. How to be trustworthy. Because in the end of the day, you want to get that good girl, being the bad boy gets you the bad girl, and that's going to lead you a lot of heartache. Trust me, I know. You want the good girl? You be Mr. Dependable. Maybe you're a little boring to the girls when they're 16, but when they're 23 and they're looking around going, the guy that's always there when they say they're going to be, okay, they're noticing that. The guy that does more than is asked of him, oh, she notices that. The guy that holds the door and grabs the groceries out of the car doesn't wait for her to do it, she's going to notice that. Be that guy. Teach our kids to be that guy. And that same process will do you well at work as well. Do more than what's asked of you, and you will succeed in life. Do less, become entitled, think it should be handed to you, you end up becoming a nationalist. Thinking that we have a right to hold down the rest of the world so that I can have a silver spoon in my mouth and do nothing. I see you, Campbell Soup. I see you, Del Monte tomatoes. Stop being a Del Monte. Be a tomato. Peace.